Sure. Perfect. Well, let's kick this thing off. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. I'm here in Zoomland with my man, Justin Overstreet, Vice President of Safety at Wildcat Oil Tools and fellow podcast host. He hosts the Street Smart podcast. Justin, thanks for coming on. Welcome to the show, man. How's things in your world?
They're great, man, and I appreciate you having me on. It's always great to connect with a fellow Justin.
Right? Yeah, fellow Justin, fellow podcaster. Two great dudes. I have to say I'm biased, obviously, but
Right.
no, it's been an absolute pleasure. Like we haven't really got to know each other too well, but we ran into each other, I think, in person for the first time at Thrive. Big shout out to everyone who put on Thrive, Daniel Energy Partners, the whole gang there. That was a badass event. But yeah, we hit it off, and you were very generous to have my wife Nicole on your podcast. So again, thank you for that. She had an absolute blast. But more interested in you, man. How's things in your world, dude? I mean, we're kicking off summers. I don't know if you have kids, right?
Yeah, two kids and a grandkid. So
That's right.
an old guy at this point. Yeah, I've got a 21-year-old daughter and a 17-year-old daughter who she just finished her junior year in high school. She'll be a senior next year.
Congrats.
And then a granddaughter that's a little over a year old. She's a year old at the end of February. So,
Man,
yeah, man,
if I look half as good as you as a grandpa, bro, I'll be in good shape.
hey, it's all the testosterone and the supplements and jujitsu and all of that. But the outside looks great, but the inside is a train wreck, man.
Oh
My
man.
body hurts at all times. But I appreciate you saying that.
No, it's great, man. It's a blessing, dude. So I mean, big plans for the summer. What's that look like for you, man?
Yeah, nothing huge right now. My wife and I, we're going to go down to Rockport here in the next couple weeks and just get away and just be, just take some downtime. It's just been such a grind, getting the new year started. And then we just at Wildcat, we're an ISO 9001 certified company. So we just went through all those audits and,
Okay.
I had that effort up. And so, it's I'm feeling a little bit burnt out, but at the same time, it's kind of like, okay, well, now we're through that period, so we can take a little bit of time and just get away. So that nothing huge, but just a good, get away for a few days and just fish and hang out.
Nice. No, to be able to disconnect is nice. So for the folks who aren't watching this on YouTube, Justin is absolutely dappered out right now. He's got a beautiful blue, I'm going to say like a sport coat. He's got the pocket square. I mean, I kind of looked like that yesterday because I went to Oklahoma City for a meeting. But I gotta ask, man, do you got the matching pants, or are you sitting there in underwear? Like what's that? You don't have to show us, but I mean, what does that look like? Are you all fully dressed, or are you just half dressed?
Yeah, so I'm not head to toe legit. I'm about waist down. I'm in shorts and barefoot,
Dude,
so it
yes.
doesn't matter, man. But at the same time,
I love it.
yeah. But I did tuck it into the shorts because I didn't
Oh
want
yeah.
the shirt to fold a certain or lay a certain weird way. People go, well, he's clearly not wearing pants, and so I did tuck it into the shorts, so I kept it classy in that way.
Dude, that's awesome. Well, no, and not to call you out, but Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful. I know. Do you know who that is?
I do,
He's
yeah.
Yeah, from Shark Tank. He's a dude from Canada he's a big, money guy. It's funny because on his social media pages, he'll be interviewing at like CNBC or Fox or CNN or whatever, Bloomberg. And when you look at on TV, he's like, again, very much prim, proper business. But then he'll show, it's like he's got his own camera behind the scenes and he's got this wall behind him. It's clearly a fake background. And then he's got his like shorts on or some like funky ass pants on. And so it's like, and he like embraces the fact that like this is Zoom or like on like remote retire. You got business up top, casual at the bottom, and that's totally cool.
Yeah, it's basically the mullet of outfits. You got the business up front and party in the back. But my background's not fake. Actually, my wife put all this together. She's pretty awesome. I told her, I said I wanted to.
I was gonna ask you about all that stuff.
I said I want it to be unique to us, to me, and then have a bunch of stuff and so it's been she's amazing at that kind of thing, and I know your wife is very gifted at decoration as well, so it may get them together and then both of us go broke watching them do that, but
hey, that's
it's pretty cool.
But I admire that, and so I was going to ask you because you got a few things that obviously sort of mean something to you. You got the Jones AT&T Stadium sign in the back. And then you got the bottle, you got the family pictures. So like, I mean, and then I see some baseballs. Like, are you a baseball guy, or what's the baseball sitting behind there?
So that baseball with the baseball card, that's actually my younger brother. He played in the minor leagues for the Angels for a period of
Oh,
time. And so that baseball
yeah.
was one. I think he hit a home run or something when he was playing college ball. So that's a ball that he signed and wrote something personal to me. And then
Wow.
the other ball that's in front of the picture of my wife and I, that's a close family friend, and he autographed it and told me he's going to be famous someday. So who knows? Maybe he
No
keeps it,
way.
maybe he does it. But baseball's always been a huge part of my life. I love baseball,
Okay.
and I didn't play a lot of baseball, but growing up with a brother that was playing at a high level from very early on, and watching him do that all the way through college, and then a bit of a pro career was really really awesome. So
Wow.
I love the game, love everything about it. Definitely
Okay.
like going to a game more than watching one on TV, but
Yeah.
the baseball is an amazing sport, so I just really enjoy it.
Heck yeah. So, I mean, who's your team? Are you an Astros fan? Or I know you're from Dallas, aren't you?
So I was born and raised in Midland, actually, but
Oh, I didn't
from
know that.
Texas. So at this point, it's we're living in Houston, so you support the home team, and the
Yeah.
Astros are are a good team also. So it's a lot of fun. But when we lived up in Fort Worth, we'd follow the Rangers and enjoyed watching them.
Yeah.
And I'm a little less hometown loyal when it comes to football. Like I tend to like players, and then obviously
Yeah.
with Patrick Mahomes going to Texas Tech and now playing in Kansas City and being the best quarterback in the league at this point, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So I tend to follow his career, but yeah, as far as baseball goes, you follow the Astros. Probably more of a casual fan at this point. Not
Yeah.
really. I don't really go to a lot of games, but yeah,
I got
Astros.
you.
If someone's had to pin me down and say who, I'd say
Yeah.
Astros.
Yeah. No, I don't. I'm ashamed to say this. I haven't watched an inning of baseball this year. I don't even have a way to watch it. I'd have to go to a bar or something. We don't have cable or ways to watch it. But I heard they're not doing that great this year. Hopefully they make a little bit of a return here before the end of the year. But they've had a great run, man. It's been cool to be part of the Houston Astros regime. And yeah, it's I love baseball, man. I got my son. He's starting. My daughter does softball, and my son he's done some baseball clinics. He's only 4, so it's like trying to like herd cats whenever he gets into
Sure, yeah.
some organized sports. It's not real organized, but yeah, it's all in good fun, man. But and then too, you've got some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think I see a couple belts back there and some pictures, man. Tell us about that, because that's something that you hold kind of close to your heart, is the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stuff, right?
Yeah, so I started training a little over 9 years ago, almost 9.5 years, and I need to update the picture. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, I got my brown belt. So,
Nice, congrats, man. That's
yeah, I
huge.
mean, it's a lot of work, and it's something that I do. Uh, I never. I'm not like you. I don't motivate myself to lift weights. I just never could like
Okay.
get into that, and I would start it, and I'd be like, okay, this time's different. I'm gonna really work out, and I just never could, and that but I do like competition, and I like learning, and I like trying to figure out things that are extremely difficult to figure out. And jujitsu is definitely that.
Mm,
And so I started it, and I started it because my daughter was training. My youngest daughter, she was like 8 at the time, and she challenged me when she was in a competition and got stuck underneath the other competitor and lost. And after the match, I said, "Hey, you got to get up. You can't just be there." And and keep in mind she's 8. And she looked at me and
right.
she said, "Well, you don't know how hard that is because you don't do jujitsu." And I was like,
Ooh,
I mean, she kind of got me there. You're right. And
that
so
set
that
a spark,
following,
huh?
yeah, she got me good. And so that following Monday, I remember walking into her gym, signing up and starting a class, and had a guy that hadn't trained that long, like maybe 6 months. And, I probably had 50 pounds on him, and that guy held me down. I couldn't move. Felt real panicky, and just like, well, this can't happen in the real world. Like, this
No
would
doubt.
be catastrophic. And so I just kept training, and here we are 9 years later. And yeah, I got my brown belt, and
Mm,
the next belt's black. So I mean,
wow.
I guess you could say it's getting pretty serious, huh? So but yeah,
Yeah.
I train about 4 days a week, and it's something I'm pretty meticulous about in terms of dedicating myself to that. And it's a difference in, if you look at my life overall, I try to differentiate between motivation and discipline, because
Mm,
motivation isn't always there. I mean,
Yes.
obviously some of the classes I go to are like at 5 o'clock in the morning,
Mm.
2 days a week. And that's right after I finished one the night before at like 7 to 9. And then you flip
Oof.
around and go to, 5:30 in the morning. I'm never motivated for that, but
Yeah.
you just count to three and stand up and go. And that's just discipline. And I try to apply that across the board in my life, but it's very obvious to applying it in jiu-jitsu for sure.
I love talking about that kind of stuff because it's interesting. I had a very similar conversation with my brother-in-law when he came and lived with us for a few years, and talking about there's a difference between motivation and discipline. But I'm curious, Justin, that's not something that you just like popped up one day and was like, I'm just going to be disciplined. Like, kind of rewind yourself back a little bit. Like, where does that come from? I mean, were you born like that, or was that something your parents taught you? Was it through sports, or was it like military, or like where does that come from? Because that's something that's unique that a lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, it's not anything that I can think back on and go, oh, hey, this moment in time is when I decided that discipline was really where I needed my life to be. My dad, we grew up in a home. It's just my brother and I. My brother's 8 years younger than me, so I had 8 years as an only child. Those
Mm.
were glorious years. And then my
Right.
and then my brother came along, and they were glorious and for another reason, right? And
Uh-huh.
and but my dad owned businesses my whole life. I saw him, be very dedicated in that way. My mother would work at those businesses as well. And I just kind of saw that work ethic. And then my dad never allowed us to not work, whether it was around the house or whatever. You had things you were going to do,
Yeah.
and you didn't want to do them, but it didn't matter because you had to still do them. And I just remember thinking, like, man, when I get older, I'm going to do what I want to do. And maybe I don't want to mow the yard every week. And then as you get older, you realize, oh, that's a reason for this,
Mm.
is that it allows you to be able to do other things. And I remember making a decision when I decided not to continue in college. At that moment, decision was, okay, I still want to get here, but now this is off the table. So I have to figure out a different way to get there, and meaning career wise. Like, I want these things in life. This, college was going to sort of set you up for that. At least that's what we were told then.
Mm.
And now it's not as necessary, but I still think, and I think as we get older, that even more so, people are going to start kind of going, well, there are other ways to do life other than saddle yourself with college and debt and all. That's a whole different conversation. But
Sure.
at that time in my life, I was like, I'm not going to go back to college. It's just not for me. Not that I couldn't do it, I just didn't want to. And it didn't change the fact that I still wanted these things in life. And so I figured out at that point, the only way you get there is if you're willing to do the things other people won't do. And the only way you get to that is by discipline. You can't motivate yourself to do things people won't do, because all the cards are stacked against that motivation. You're like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. And
Hmm.
so it came down to, I'm just going to do it. And at that time in my life, it wasn't like I made a decision like, oh, here's discipline. It was like, no, I just have to do this. And
Yeah.
so now, as I'm older and I can articulate it better, I realize it is discipline. It's not motivation. That it really is driven the success that I've been able to achieve. And again, I had a lot of luck along the way too. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and so I mean, as a father, how have you s- like taught or encouraged your kids to maintain that level of discipline, or to learn it? Because again, it's somewhat of a learned, or you see it through in your case, your father's actions, which is very, oddly similar to my situation, which I don't want to get into because I'm more interested in your story. But as a father, I always kind of, as my kids are 7 and 4, I'm like, how do I instill that level of discipline? And I read a book years ago called "The Obstacle Is the Way" by Ryan Holiday, who I admire as an author. And it's like, and it kind of goes back to, easy decisions, hard life, hard decisions, easy life, right? Like that's kind of the mindset with
Mm-hmm.
it. How do you instill that in your kids? Like, have you found the magic bullet with that, or how have you handled that?
I haven't. I wish there was a magic bullet. The thing that I try to do is very similar to how I was raised, just lead by example, you know, and you know,
Yeah.
you know, I work from home now, so that my kids get to see that, you know, that every day I get up, I come into my office, I'm in here, you know, my daughters have asked me, my oldest daughter asked me one time, like, how do you, like, what do you do to even make money? Like, you're at your computer all day. I was like, well, is that really what you think I do all day? And clearly it is. But she sees me there all day, and that's a discipline thing. They see me go to
Yeah.
jujitsu. They see me come, like yesterday, you know, at 5 o'clock in the morning, I was at jujitsu, work in my, you know, job all day, finish that, go downstairs, change clothes, go outside, mow the yard, you know, all those things. It's not like the day just ended because I magically decided I was done working that day. And just try to instill that through example. And then when they're undisciplined, try to point out the consequence of that undiscipline to them so that they
Hmm.
maybe don't miss that, and then realize that it doesn't necessarily always hit home. You know, my youngest daughter wrestles in high school, and
Oh,
last year
awesome.
took second in district, and it got to wrestle in regionals. And it doesn't matter that I have 9 years doing jujitsu and understand positionally kind of some of the stuff she's doing. Trying to correct her is it's still, you know, a fight. And she's
Yeah.
like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, yeah, you're right. Cause I don't do this, you know, 4 days a week, whatever.
Yeah.
And you
Well,
realize at the time that trying to explain to her, you should have been more disciplined in this approach. You know, picking the time and place also is important. And I'm not the best at that because I want to
yeah.
address it right now. And
Yeah.
because if I don't, I'll see something shiny over there and forget completely about that thing that I wanted to address. So
Yeah.
I don't have a magic bullet. I don't have the answer, but I just try to lead by example and try to point out the consequence of undiscipline, you know, when I see it.
I think that's a great principle, man. And I think it goes with anything in life is if you can lead by example. I mean, you know, a bunch of lip service doesn't mean anything, and that's, you know, I think a challenge too with a lot of whether it be the workforce, you know, at home. It's like, oh, do this and you need to do that, and it's like, well, if you're not kind of taking your own advice, then likelihood of someone taking your advice is pretty slim. And so if you can lead by example and just let your actions speak for themselves, I think the rest will take care of itself. I want to pivot a little bit, and you mentioned with Wildcat Oil Tools, you went through a big audit. It was ISO 9000? Is that what you had referred to?
Yeah. So we have our ISO 9001 certification. We got
Okay.
that in 2020, and then we've
Can
gone
you
through the audits. You know, you go through annual audits and recertification. We did a recertification last year, and then these are the annual periodic audits that we just finished this year.
Okay. Can you explain for those who may not be familiar or who work in maybe who work in like a service type sector who aren't familiar with those type of audits or why it's important to hold that type of certification? Because that's, you know, in our world, you know, I'm in oilfield services as well. We provide chemicals. You know, we also follow a lot of those same guidelines. But can you explain what ISO 9001 is and why stuff like that is important, especially for folks like yourself and the work that you do?
Sure. So for us, it was important at Wildcat to go after the ISO certification, the International Standard Certification 9001, because we wanted to pursue international work. And so, in order to pursue international work, if you don't have that in place, it's sort of a non-starter. And you know, we were very fortunate at Wildcat because it wasn't a lot of times people will enter into that, and what it is a quality management standard, so QMS standard certification, meaning you have a quality management system in place. And so if you have a procedure or a document, then you're audited against whether you're living up to that document, you're doing what the document says, and then you have a system in place to identify and correct any potential issue that comes up.
Got
So
it.
that's really kind of, if I had to boil it down, what the standard, how it applies to Wildcat. Again, like I said, the reason we wanted it and pursued this certification is because we wanted to pursue international work, and it was non-starter if you didn't have it. So in some cases, a lot of companies will go into that and say, hey, we need to be ISO 9001 certified. Let's build a quality management structure or system and pursue that. Wildcat, we already had that in place. And so it
Okay.
wasn't a question of, man, we've got to build this thing from scratch. It was a, hey, let's get the certification so that we're recognizing what we're already doing as a company and doing well.
Yeah.
And so for us, that's really what it became. And Yeah, but that certification, it's you have to write a standard, and ours is, like 40 something pages long. It says everything from when you receive something from a vendor, how you verify the vendor did that well, and if there's something the vendor didn't do well, then there's a whole supplier corrective action process to deal with that.
Yeah.
Or if you have an internal failure, how you deal with that. Or if you have, you know, anything. I mean, it runs the gamut, and it really boils down to how are you ensuring that every time something goes out the door, it is to a standard of quality. And if for some reason it doesn't adhere to that standard of quality, what mechanisms are in place to address that, identify the causes, and then correct it?
Gotcha. No, that's a perfect overview. It's funny. I gave a presentation yesterday, and one of the things I highlighted in the presentation was that our company does have a strong quality management system, which I've slowly learned about it over time. Because in sales, sometimes you don't typically, it's not something you go and like pitch to customers. But if, to your point, if all of a sudden there's an issue, if you've got a good QMS, you can you can dive back and provide them with the necessary information to say, oh, we follow these standards and this process and this and that. And it's certainly a level of protection, but it also makes sure, like you said, anything that you're getting onto the market meets, the highest level of standards possible, and meets certain criteria that perhaps the customer requires. In your case, thinking about going overseas, would you say that are there some folks, and let's keep it high level to not call anyone out, but like in the oil field service side that kind of skate around the ISO 9000? Because from what I understand, to get those certifications, there's a cost associated with it. And a lot of
Sure.
people kind of, you can skirt around it, but still conduct work. Is that true? Or can you kind of briefly describe that?
So I would say there are a lot of companies that probably already are meeting the standard of the ISO certification, but to your point, it is expensive to pursue, and it is costly to maintain. I mean, you
Right.
have to have an external. There's a third party certifying agent that you use, and you pay them, and you're a customer of them, and then they're the ones that also conduct the audit, and they charge you for that. I mean, there is some upfront costs. Obviously, is much more, and then you have to maintain it, and there's a cost associated with that. So yeah, I do think there's a lot of companies that look at it and say, we're already doing this, but we don't need the certification because maybe we're a smaller company, or maybe we're just working in the lower 48. We're not that interested in international.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that here recently we've had some conversations and some audits from our customers where they'll ask specifically, do you have a quality management system that is certified under some certifying agency? And that is for domestic work. And I don't know that it would be a deal breaker if we didn't, but it sure is nice to be able to say, yeah, here's our certification for
Right.
ISO 9001. And so to answer your question, I do think there are some companies out there that maybe you're not skirting it in a nefarious way, but
Sure.
they're saying, hey, we don't want to necessarily put the capital up to go for this certification because we don't necessarily need it either. And so I do think that happens quite a bit, but I also think there are some service companies out there that just are, maybe not as interested in quality, and you get that in any business, in any sector. So I'm not that concerned about that. But again, having the certification, the way we explain to our customers, it doesn't mean we're not going to have a failure. It doesn't mean that we won't have a quality issue here or there, but it means that we have a system in place to address that when it does happen.
Yeah.
And we feel like that sets us up, for success long term
Mhm.
with our clients.
That's great. And again, it gives you competitive advantage, right? Like if all
It
else
does.
equal, someone who has that, uh, it shows that your company's putting forth the effort to invest in themselves to ensure that you're meeting these standards. And it's like you said, it's one thing you can have them in place, but without third party and audits and all that, that gives you another layer of credibility. So no, that's really neat. And so talking, with regards to your experience in safety, you've got a pretty long track record in the safety world. Was that always something that you were interested in? And because typically, like the safety folks that I've worked with over the years, and I've worked with safety folks all the way from drilling rigs up into, into the corporate world, you don't really necessarily fit the mold for a safety guy. So like, how did that come about?
Oh, I want you to qualify that though. Tell me how do I not fit the mold?
I would say that typically they have a little bit of a different personality. And the ones that and again, I want to speak lightly on this between the personality and the way they deliver and just their actions are slightly different than yours. And again, not one or the other is any better or any worse, but the safety avatar, from my observation and the people that I've worked with, is different than yours.
Yeah. So for me, I didn't think about safety as a career path until, I mean, I was probably already in the industry. Oh man, probably good 5 to 7 years, 8 years, but I was doing safety the whole time also. So I got my start, like I said, living in Midland, Texas. My dad owned a business that did non-destructive testing, primarily in refineries and gas plants and things, but you could do it anywhere that was required. And I ran a group for him that did, like, piping and instrumentation diagrams, so schematics of these facilities. And at the same time, he was like, "Oh, by the way, can you handle all of the safety stuff for the company?" And we had about 60 to 70 employees at the height. I think he had 100, but really at that point, it was in the late 90s. It was like, and when my kids refer to that as like the 1900s, that makes me feel so old, but it's not, I guess it's technically right. But anyhow, it was, safety is so much different than it was like, here's this video and here's this test. And also here are the answers to this test. And we need to just get the paperwork in place so that we can show our customer we have a program. And so that was the way it was. But I was also at the same time learning, some of those things. And then I leave there. I leave my dad's company, not for any bad reason. I just got an opportunity. My dad was like, "Hey, try it on your own, see what happens." So
Yeah.
great. So I went to work for another company, and that's when I had a role that was a dedicated safety role. It is specific to training, but and it's funny, I kind of set you up for it. Was kind of a shitty question to say, why did I not fit the mold of a safety
No, it's
guy?
a great
I
question.
know I don't. But at the same time, I've more readily fit the mold of a sales guy. So
Yes.
when I went into the company with my friend, they hired me, and my title was director of training. But the whole reason he hired me wasn't because I was some great instructor or had some vast background in safety. It was because I had my family has a long history in Midland, Odessa, Permian Basin, oil field area. So I had a lot of contacts, and he knew I was pretty good at sales. And so he was like, "You can definitely grow our business. And also you can do these things." Well, at the same time, I'm building training programs and selling and stuff. I'm also learning just inherently how to do that stuff.
Yeah.
And the whole time that I was doing it, I started looking at that sort of, like, I think it's a great analogy, to an avatar, right? Like when you think safety guy, what do you think of? And I didn't ever want to be that. And, you have to do some of those things just on your way up, whether you're in the field filling a fire extinguisher or whatever, you're running checklists or you're running inspections or you're doing those things. But at the same time I'm doing those things, I'm thinking, man, this is not the way to do this. You've got to figure out a way to force multiply this guy or this girl who's doing safety, because if you don't, we all know what happens in downturns to large staffs. If they have large safety staffs, those dwindle first. Those in HR, they start whittling that stuff down and figuring it out. And I just thought, man, there's got to be a way to do this differently. And I just never liked the idea of, carrying a clipboard and going and holding adults accountable. To me, is just something that is absolutely ridiculous, especially because we all get paid really good money to do grown-up things, and we're grown-ups. Yeah. And if you can't do those things, then that's a grown-up problem that gets solved. Yeah. And so the same with safety. I never thought, man, these guys are showing up to work expecting to, wanting to get hurt. No one ever wakes up that morning and goes, "Man, I can't wait to break my leg today." They're just going to work, and they're having whatever reason, pressures externally or internally or whatever, that are causing them to make a decision that is to a detriment.
Right.
So I wanted to figure that out more than I wanted to figure out what is the best way to teach somebody about H2S again this year. Right. So it just wasn't something that I didn't like the mold that safety was in. I didn't like that mold at all. I really wanted to function more in an operations role, but more in support of that. And so my entire career has been spent like, how do I, rather than make operations more challenging for operations people, that's already the most challenging position they have, how do I enable them and empower them more so that they can own this? And I never understood the idea that you're going to say, hey, manager, you own safety for your work group. And oh, by the way, here's a safety guy dedicated to your work group. Well, at that point, that manager is never going to have to own safety because he's got a guy there to do that for him.
Yeah.
And if I were that manager, I wouldn't try to own it either. I'd let that guy, safety guy, all he wanted to.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it just the way it goes. But for me, it was never, I never, again, going back to the conscious decision between discipline and motivation, I was never like, okay, I'm going to be a safety guy. I just sort of ended up doing that. And then, my role over the years, I've been really blessed to work for companies that have allowed me to really just go and do things. Wildcat's no different. I work within Wildcat. I've built out our SharePoint to be more functional and more easy for people to use and more function like an internal intranet site. And then I built out I helped work to streamline the process around how tickets funnel their way into the accounting group. And all that stuff is really just, it's been able to kind of revolutionize the business, take our training out of the field and not worry so much about hiring a third party to do the training. I was like, man, I already have 20 years of knowledge and material and all that stuff, understanding. All I need to do is just get a software program, get a mic, record, build these programs out, build out an LMS and launch that. And you can do all that stuff way more effectively and at much less expense. It just takes time and effort. And I've always been very fortunate. I've had companies allow me to do those things because I love doing that kind of stuff.
Yep. No, it reminds me of a transformational department versus a transactional, and safety can very much, and again, I say this because I've experienced it. It can be very much transactional. It's like, check the boxes, make sure you do this. You'll get your hand slapped if you don't. And instead of, like you said, enabling your employees to be better, no one would ever argue that safety is of the utmost important. But what can happen, and again, I've experienced it, is it inhibits your ability to perform. And when you're more concerned about the safety representative on location coming up behind you, telling you do this, don't do that, you're kind of walking on eggshells, which can sometimes even make it more dangerous. And so I'm speaking strictly from like a rig sort of level, like a field level experience. And sometimes I've observed some of the larger organizations, like operators, have such a strict safety program for the right reasons. But do you think that there's a point where you become, I don't even want to say too safe, but when you implement too much, checks and balances on the safety front that can inhibit performance, that can ultimately impact your business? Like, is that a tough balance for you guys, or have you kind of figured that out?
Again, I'm very fortunate. I work for a company, Wildcat. We've got our manager team. Our management structure has been in place the entire time since I've been here, and I'm coming up on 5 years. So those guys came to us, and they came from large service providers that had very robust safety programs. So it wasn't like I was doing anything they hadn't seen before or hadn't expected. So it was the learning curve was pretty shallow. That said, I also work really, really hard to minimize the amount of strain to the business. And I do think that you can get to a point where you're really kind of limiting your business almost in a self-destructive way. I'll give you an example. I'm not going to say the company's name, obviously, but I work for a large multinational publicly traded company. And we would say, okay, let's say the OSHA standard, and I'm just making stuff up, but let's say the OSHA standard says you have to go to 5, right? And then this company would write a policy and say, we go to 10 because we've so much better, or for whatever reason. And then we would fire people for going to 7. And you're like, well, they're exceeding what the federal government says has to be the standard. Why are we doing this? And they were like, well, our policy's 10. And I was like, well, we wrote that, right? So we could rewrite that if it's something that's killing our business, because we're getting rid of great people and they're going to competitors and they're saying, F those guys. And then they're also taking business with them. And so I saw very early on how if you didn't think that stuff out well enough, you could really impact operations. And that, I think, is a lot of times where, people become very adversarial towards HSC reps. And I've been very, very blessed in my career. Excuse me. Anytime you go in, you obviously go in thinking, okay, let's see how long it's going to take to win these guys over. And sometimes you don't. And sometimes it just doesn't happen, personality wise or whatever. Again, I've been very fortunate in my career that I'm able to sort of make my way in and have people respond very favorably towards what we're doing. And I think that's because I don't try to impose too much on them. At the same time, you want to make sure they understand that, hey, if I'm asking you to do this, I'm asking you to do it because it's something that needs to happen. And again, you can water that down if you're constantly asking them to do things. And so because I'm not constantly in their ear saying, make sure you do this, make sure and I'm not doing that intentionally, because then when I do get in their ear and say, hey, make sure you do this, they go, okay, I'll get it. It's not a problem. Right. So there's a lot that goes into that. And my wife asked me one time, I accidentally found myself in a sales role, because in oil and gas, that sort of happens, right? Yeah. You find yourself doing other things. And so I found myself in a sales role, and she said, are you worried about that? You've never sold before. And I said, what are you talking about? I've been selling my whole career. Yeah. I'm trying to sell people on an idea that there's a better way to do something that I've never even done myself. And that guy's probably done it longer than I've been alive. And I've got to convince that guy to do that. Yeah. Yeah. That's a sales job. And so, yeah, I would say, like, to your point, I don't fit the safety cop sort of persona, but I do think that my personality, my skill set lends itself well to what I'm doing. Yeah, no, it's interesting. It reminds me, I got one of my best friends is he was a rig hand. We broke out together on rigs. He made his way up to derrick hand, and then he got on to again the safety side of on the drilling contractor side. Then he ended up going to work for Shell, and the same way, like, he somehow was able to win all the rig hands over. He'd go out and just the way he influenced and communicated with the rig hands, they all loved him, like, whereas like his relief, everyone hated. But they were just a complete different opposite type people. And it's the way you talk to them in our business, and just like many other businesses that are industrial, it's a people's business, right? And if you treat people with respect, without trying to drop the hammer any chance you get, just to flex a little bit, it can go a long ways. And I laugh because, like you said, there's folks in the oil field that have been doing the same thing for 50 years, and you come in and try and convince someone to do a little different, right? You're going to have some colorful responses. And so there's an art to it, but at the end of the day, it's if you can effectively influence and communicate that, and then you can enable the employees, it goes a long ways. So no, that's really cool. And hopefully you've helped kind of, change the persona for folks in the safety world. And again, I have nothing but good things to say. But again, it's especially on location, it's always like, oh man, like there's, the safety cop, like you said. And so I was just interested in the conversation because I've never had to step foot in that world, but I've dealt with many over the years. I want to switch gears a little bit, talking about podcasting. As I mentioned earlier, when we got started, you're a fellow podcaster. I'm curious, man, talk about Street Smart Podcast. I think was it 20 some episodes deep, if I remember correctly? Yesterday I put out episode 20, that we have some in the can, but yeah, done. Tell me about 20. That, man. Okay. Well, how's it been going, man? How'd you get into it? Tell the story, man. So I've been listening to podcasts forever, and it's something that just always kind of fascinated me. And so I was like, oh, well, why can't I do that? And so a friend of mine named Jeff Peoples, he has a podcast called the Mission Zero podcast. Yeah. And I was the guest number 1 on there. And then afterwards he asked me if I wanted to co-host. And so I was doing that. Oh, and nice. Then one day, Aaron Marquez, who owns Wildcat as well as Flecha Azul Tequila and a million other things, he called me up on the phone. And so Aaron and I have known each other now for a long time. I actually worked for Aaron when he was in his late 20s and I was in my early 30s in Midland. We worked for Neighbors Well Services at the same time. And I actually worked for him in his department. So I've known him for a long time. So he and I, are good friends. he called me off the phone. He's like, you should do your own podcast. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, yeah, you should. And I said, well, I don't want to do it on safety. And he goes, why not? And I said, cause like I spend a lot of my time doing that. Why and as good a career as that's been to me, I'm going to do something else. And he said, well,
Yeah.
what'd you do it on? And I said, entrepreneurship. And he said, oh, okay, cool. And I said, but I don't want to talk about the people's company that they have or have founded necessarily. And he's like, what do you mean? And I was like, if you've listened to entrepreneur podcasts, they'd be like, so tell me about company X and how's that going? And honestly, okay, well, that to me always had kind of short legs, but I always like human interest stuff. So I always want to know who the person is. And so there it is. And so I was like, okay, what I would want to do is a long form conversation where I wasn't bound by any sort of like, okay, we've got to get this done in 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Those are important.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I always enjoy those longer conversations, the Joe Rogan style conversation or the Jocko Willink style conversations, that go for, there's no end to them if they don't want there to be.
Yeah.
And because I think you can get a lot of great information and really come away feeling like, oh, okay, I understand that person. I understand some of the reasons they make decisions they make. And I don't necessarily have to agree or disagree with all those, but I get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to talk to specifically entrepreneurs. And then from that standpoint, who they were and what made them able to do those things, because it's kind of a superpower being an entrepreneur. It's something that I watched as a kid and then as an adult was fearful of, and so never really have done. And people are like, well, you founded a podcast. I'm like, okay, well, whatever. I mean,
I feel you.
that's pretty, the barrier to entry. If people understood the barrier to entry to that, it's not that hard once you have equipment and understanding, okay, well, I can do this.
Right.
And so, yeah, I was like, okay, well, what are we going to call it? And then, the vanity in me was like, well, I'm street smart because you got to be that to do it. And my last name's Overstreet. So why not? And so did that. And, came up May of last year. So May of 22, came up with the concept, the idea, started kind of mapping that out and what that would look like, logos and all that stuff. And then started recording in June and recorded a few. And then July, it launched the first one with Cody Gill, who's the CEO of Stealth in the Permian Basin. And Cody was awesome. He'd never done a podcast before. And I went to his office and that was kind of the beginning of it. Was like, I want to be able to just sort of this, guerrilla style, like go where you are and set my stuff up and record and all that stuff. And man, it's been great. So it's been something that's been a lot of fun. I've met a lot of really interesting people. I've gotten to interview some people that'll make you wonder, man, what am I really doing with my life? And, and I'm such a loser, right? And you can walk out of there and you're like, I can't believe that guy let me talk to him for 2 hours.
Yeah.
But no, it's been great. Got picked up by a network at the end of the 22. And so Upright Digital, Josh Lowry and those guys over there, picked up the podcast and so started then at that point. Now I've got a studio and a producer, Lauren, who's amazing. And Lauren Johnstone, shout out to her because she's awesome. And then, it just kind of keeps building. I got, Upright Digital had an amazing setup at OTC. So I got to do a bunch of podcasts there and, see that. And I've never been to OTC, so that was kind of cool. And,
nice.
Yeah, it's been really, really great. And then, Upright Digital just signed a deal with World Oil. So the podcast is going to be on the World Oil platform now. And it's just kind of one of those things where you're like, man, I didn't really anticipate any of this. But okay, let's, I guess, see where this goes. And it's been a lot of fun.
That's so cool. No, it's actually, it's funny when Josh had announced on LinkedIn about the world. Actually, no, he announced it on, I think, Energy and Transition podcast. It was a brief episode announcing it. And so I text him. It's like, man, congrats. And he fired back. Right? He's like, man, this is growing. Things are good. And every time I talk to him, it's like he's sitting on a rocket, man. It's cool to kind of see. And then obviously picking you up to come along for the ride is awesome. And so I'm curious, what's the biggest thing you've learned or any sort of big takeaways from any of your guests, or like sort of an overarching theme with a bunch of the entrepreneurs that you've interviewed?
So from an overarching theme on entrepreneurship, it's just an unwavering belief in what they're doing. And even if that doesn't work out the first time, they sort of are just geared to retool and try again. And it's really
Hmm.
interesting to me because let that shit fail even a little bit the first time, and I'd be like, well, I'm going to go back and work for somebody else. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But there's just zero reservation, and that's very, very, like I said, I feel like it's a superpower. It's not something that everyone possesses, or everyone would do that. But I guess one thing also that's unique is that there's no single way to do it. Everyone's sort of got a different idea, from whether they kind of get pushed into it because of downsizing at a company they were at, and they're like, well, I don't have anything else going on, I'm gonna try this. Or they're like, lifelong, I'm doing this and I'm doing it over and over and over and over again. Or it's just kind of, they end up natural progression, end up there. So there's just really no, straight line to it. It's just that, but all of them have a belief, and also all of them have a fear about it. They're terrified at the same time they're doing it, which is, again, impressive to me.
Yeah, no, it is, man. It's funny you mentioned people are like, oh, you founded a podcast, and again, people have said the same thing, and it's like, yeah, like a few hours and like a couple $100, you can knock out a podcast, and there's literally no
Sure.
risk. Like you don't have to go out and raise capital, hire people, like you know what I mean. You can just get on and start
Right.
talking. So I say the same, and I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, and looking back, it's all I knew. My parents owned their own business, and they had multiple little side hustles, and my dad flipped cars, boats, and motorhomes, and I mean, constantly wheeling and dealing, and now I'm in the corporate world, and my wife, who I thought was going to be nothing but corporate America for the rest of her life, is the one who's doing the entrepreneurial route, and it's just amazing to see. And
Yeah, but
again,
she's
it's
awesome though. I mean, her mindset around that, and then the tying in sort of the social aspect of that she is, and all of that, that it's so close to her,
yeah,
her heart. And all that does is, I think, make that a stronger, it makes what she's doing, her success is even stronger because of that, because it's tied to something that emotionally means something to her as well. Not just the
hmm,
business, obviously that means something emotionally, but
yeah.
the social aspect of a lot of what she's working through, that emotional tie to that, I think is only made her more successful. She's an amazing person.
No, I'm super humbled to hear that, and to your point, like once a person figures out their why, then nothing else really matters. You know what I mean? It's like
Mhm.
the byproduct will be financial success if you just work, if you work at it hard enough and long enough, it'll come. But figuring out what emotionally is driving you, knowing your why, which could be, a whole nother topic of conversation,
Sure.
and then coming down to purpose. We're all trying to figure out why in the hell are we here and what are we here for, and how can we leave a
Right.
legacy.
Right.
And again, that kind of ties into the folks that have really made something of it. They have such deep conviction that no one can tell them otherwise, like even their closest loved ones, to tell them like you're not doing this right, or you shouldn't be doing this. It's just like it's all noise, and they're just laser focused.
Yeah, it's a little bit crazy. I mean, it's almost like
Yeah.
I think it's Conor McGregor said that in order to achieve anything of greatness, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but
Yeah.
his basic sentiment was, you've got to be a little bit insane for what you're trying to accomplish to do it at that level.
Yes.
And I think that if you watch any of that, any entrepreneur that has managed any real success, they're a little bit out there when it comes to, if someone says, I don't think that's the way, they're like, no, it is. That's the way we're doing it. And we're doing
Right.
it that way because I said so. And I believe in
Yeah.
that. And they believe it to their core. And I do think you have to get to that almost unrational, just an irrational belief in what you're doing.
Yeah. No, that's so true. And speaking of Colin McGregor, I don't know if you've seen the Netflix special McGregor Forever, but have
I
you watched
have.
it?
It's awesome.
It's so good, man. And
Yeah.
I was with some customers yesterday, and we were talking about it, and none of them had watched it. And for me, and again, I know it's Netflix, so I look at everything with a grain of salt, but seeing him like I've only ever seen him on social media and in the ring, right? And it's like he's built a character.
Sure.
But seeing him at home with his, I guess it was fiance at the time. I've only watched, I think, 3 episodes. I haven't made it quite through everything, but like seeing how he interacts with his family and his loved ones, I was like, dang. And then like the humble beginnings gave me
Oh
such
yeah,
a
the guy
higher,
was he was seriously considering quitting,
yeah,
and then they were like, just one more, man, and he said did it, and I mean he's just. What's interesting about him is, you know, you're right. You do see the sort of character that he's built, and you see the, you know, you see if you follow him on social media, you see him buying a new car every week, or you know, wearing the bespoke suits, and you know, larger than life guy, right?
yeah,
At the same time, that dude is a legit killer. Like he can fight, like fight. Now imagine
mm-hmm.
having hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank and going, I'm gonna still get punched in the face and see what happens. I mean, you're talking about someone that's just, again, he absolutely loves that.
yeah,
The money happened and the fame happened and all of those things happened, but it didn't change who he was as a person, as a fighder. And you
yeah,
can say, you know, his skills are diminished or this or whatever. That happens because of age, but he's still
of course,
doing it. And
yeah,
I remember, do you remember? It was a couple years back. Him and like Machine Gun Kelly got into it on a red carpet
yes,
somewhere,
yeah,
and Machine Gun Kelly was all kind of posted up at him. And I remember, you know who Brendan Schaub is?
oh yeah, I love that
So
dude.
Brendan Schaub made the comment. You understand who he is, right? Machine Gun Kelly, like you
Exactly.
can't stop that guy from doing anything he wants to you, and it's hilarious to watch people, you know, interact, whether it's with him or with Nate Diaz or any of those guys out in public, and you're like, oh, you're dealing with elite level fighters. Like these
Yeah.
guys fight. If the UFC didn't exist, these guys would just be roaming the land taking people's stuff. Like they can, you know, it's
I know it's
unreal.
so
So
true, man. Yeah. Be talking, yeah,
yeah,
people peacocking in front of folks like that. And I
it's
mean, again,
hilarious.
yeah, no, it is. And yeah, because literally like 99% of the world it went toe to toe with him. He would just dominate him. You know what I
It's
mean? Like it's
unreal. It
yeah.
is unreal. You know, one of the people I got to interview, I was fortunate enough to interview, is a guy named Chad Robichaux. And
Oh,
Chad's
I know that name.
yeah, his story's amazing. And you could find it. I mean, there's a friggin' movie on Amazon Prime about his whole thing, but
Okay.
essentially short story. Marine. He also fought in Bellator, UFC, or
Oh
not UFC guys. He
yeah.
was a black belt in jiu-jitsu. But beyond that, when we were pulling out of Afghanistan, he founded the group that went in and got like 17,000 more civilians out of there, including his interpreter. He's an amazing, he's one of those where I left the podcast going, well, I
Yeah. What have
suck.
I done?
I
Yeah.
absolutely suck as a human.
Dude,
Uh,
right?
but you meet that guy and you're like, okay, he's your 4th degree black belt in jiu-jitsu. He has like an 18-2 record in professional fighting at the highest level.
Mm.
Okay. And he's 5'3", 125 pounds, and he would absolutely murder me. And I'm not huge. I'm, you know, 5'10", 190, but you're like, oh, that person's walking the streets. Like if he wanted to, he could just do anything in the world to you and you couldn't really
Yeah.
stop him, you know, and it's
Oh,
pretty remarkable.
yeah. No, it is, man. It's fascinating talking to folks like that. I've talked to few and far between, but just listening to them on podcasts, I've listened to countless of them. And yeah, just again, when you look back at folks who have done something at such a high level, the mindset that they've had and the again discipline that they've just over and over and over again without question is just absolutely amazing to see. And so
What, and
um
it's something too that if you can apply that to any part of your life, whether it's your professional life, your marriage, or your,
mhm.
you know, any of it, you will drastically change the trajectory that you're on in a positive way.
Yep. No, that's a great closing segment. And again, we've burned through almost an hour real quick. I do want to close out. I like to ask a couple personal questions. The first one I want to ask is, what does the ideal Friday night look like to you? If you had, again, assuming money was no option, you could go anywhere, do anything, spend it with whoever you wanted to. What would that look like for you?
So does it have to be every single Friday night,
No,
or
no,
is it?
like if
Yeah,
just almost like just this
I'm
one
messing
Friday
with you.
night. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Every
Yeah.
Friday.
So
What are you gonna
every single Friday. No.
do?
Yeah. For me, it would be, you know, finish work early, and then go get couples massage with my wife, like a 2 hour,
Yeah.
full, massage with good stretching and stuff. Cause, my body's pretty wound up from 4 days of jujitsu ahead of that.
Yeah.
Following that, you do that early enough that you still have time afterwards to go get a nice dinner.
Yeah.
We drink a little bit of wine.
Where would you go? I mean, get specific. Where would you go for dinner?
Nothing super fancy like Texas Roadhouse or somewhere like that, man. Get a
Nice,
steak.
dude. You are from
Get
Midland,
some,
bro.
yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
You'll get a steak or find some place that's cool and local and outside. Like here, I
Yeah.
live in Conroe. We just opened a place here in Conroe. They call it the Table at Madeley, and it's like an
Cool.
outdoor. They have some wine and like frozen margaritas and stuff, and they usually have live music, but they have food trucks, so you can get kind of unique food. So something unique like that. That's not either. I'm going to go eat a huge fat steak at Texas Roadhouse, or do something unique and kind of
Yeah.
off the beaten path. And but really just going to spend it with my wife and come home. And because the week's been me running and gunning, and even though I work from
Mm-hmm.
home, I'm basically not present for much of the day, and then jujitsu 4 of those days, and she's pretty gracious to allow most of that.
Yeah.
So my Friday would be spending that time with her, and you know if she wanted to go fishing, we'd go fishing. If she wanted to do something else, we'd figure that out. But
I
really
love it.
that.
Yeah, man. And you know what the beautiful thing about that is it seems achievable. And so your ideal Friday night has probably been happening quite a bit, or at least it
Yeah.
has. And so I commend you for that, man. I think that that's great. You mentioned jujitsu and some other things, but aside from those sort of regular activities that you do you have any daily habits or routines that contribute to your success or that keep you focused, disciplined? I mean, is there anything sort of that you do every single day that keeps you locked in?
Um, I mean, I do the same things every single day. So it's not like I have a single thing that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I stay locked in because of that. It's also been a bit of a detriment because if something happens that kind of upsets that balance, then I really can lose a lot of momentum. And it takes me a bit to get that back. And,
Mm,
because I'm like, okay, well, now's the time when I normally do this. So what, I mean, now what?
yeah.
And so it kind of, it can throw me for a loop. But as far as, daily routines, like I said, even though I work from home and my schedule's a bit flexible, I still wake up at an early time. I still get an early start. I still take a shower every morning. I still fix my hair every morning before I come up to my office, even though I may not ever have to even be seen that day by anybody professionally. It makes me feel like, okay, now I'm transitioning to this part of my day. And
Yeah.
so when we moved to the home office setup, I have an office downstairs, but I told my wife I wanted my office to be in our media room. And she's like, we don't have any windows or anything. I was like, that's intentional.
Yeah.
I said, but I want to feel like I'm going somewhere to go to work, whether it's
That's cool.
walking upstairs or whatever. So it's just a mental transition. And for me, that's always been something I've needed, uh, you know, almost like turning a page physically, like a physical change. But I make sure I do that same thing every day. I wake up every morning early. I take a shower. I get dressed. Whether it's partially dressed, like you pointed out earlier,
Yeah.
or otherwise. But I do prepare myself for the day as though I was going to have to be seen by somebody, and it just helps me get my mind right.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And honestly, I fell into the trap during COVID where, I'd wake up and at first it was kind of like, yeah, I want to kind of preparing. And over time, dude, I got sloppy. Like I was just like, I'd get up and sometimes brush my teeth, maybe not till like noon. Like, dude, it just got like, and then finally it hit me. And I was like, I was becoming like, and I still trained in my garage. Like I still worked out. I still eat
Mhm.
clean. Like I didn't just sit and like drink beer all after like all day. Like I didn't become a complete potato, but I noticed just like it was just odd. Like I just like did some self reflection. I'm like, normally I'd get up, my alarm would go off, I'd be up, brush my teeth, crush my pre workout and my AG1s, get to the gym, like, and then now it's like I get up and like kind of like sloth around a little bit, and like
Mhm.
it was odd. So I commend you, for still working from home, because I would. It's not for me. it's, obviously it works for some, but you get a lot of social interactions with your podcast, and
Sure.
you're out and about. I noticed, it's not, you're just like coding for 19 hours a day behind your desk,
No,
but
no.
it's, it's, man, it's, I commend people who are still grinding it out at home, because it's a challenge, and some people love it, some don't. But the point being is that you've still maintained that level of, like, you're holding yourself to a certain standard. Like,
Sure.
I'm going to get up, I'm going to do this, I'm going to prepare, because you just never know. And all of a sudden you have a meeting that kicks off, you're mentally ready. You're not like, oh, I gotta go
Right.
like do my hair and brush my teeth, and like, well, I haven't shaven in 4 days, and it's like, you know
Right.
what I mean? So again, like, super respecting on that part for sure.
Well, so you go back to the Conor McGregor documentary, and he has a part in that where he's talking about when he was not performing at the level that he wanted to. He's like, all these things you're supposed to do. So I know that I should wake up at this time. He said, I wasn't waking up at that time. I should train at this time. I wasn't training at that time. I need to eat this. I wasn't eating that. I don't need to drink that. I was drinking that. And he said, and what that is you're building up these little tiny defeats all day. So your entire mentality becomes one of defeat rather than one of victory. And so for me, and when he articulated that, I was like, well, of course, that's what I'm thinking. But it wasn't like that. It genuinely for me, it was like, if I wake up every day and I don't change underwear for 4 days, or I wear the same shirt 5 days in a row or whatever, nobody's going to say a thing to me about that, but I'll know.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of one of those things where I was like, I can't know that about myself and still work at the level that I want to. And so it was just kind of like, I have to do these things for my own state of mind.
Yeah. No, it's like one of my first football coaches told me, and I'll never forget, it's like, it's what you do off the field when no one's looking that's going to determine how you play on the field. And that's where champions are bred, on, on your own time, doing things when nobody is looking. And so it's, again, it's in life and business, sports, everything. It's like, what are you willing to do when no one's watching? Because that's what's going to make winners and champions. And I mean, you're sitting there right there with them. Justin, this has been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate the conversation. We could have went on for long term.
Sure.
Unfortunately, we'll have to do a round two, because I do have other things that I'm committed to. One day when I'm doing this full time, we'll kick off a 3 or 4 hour one, because I know the long form could be fun. I feel like we could get into lots of good conversation for the listeners, and you don't have to necessarily spell them out, but where can they find you? Where can they find the podcast? What I'll do is I'll put the link in the show notes so people can scroll down, click it. But where are you active online?
Yeah. Before I do that, I just want to say I appreciate you having me on, and it's been awesome kind of following your podcast and obviously getting to meet your wife and all those things. I met her before I did you. The first time I saw you, you were in a Spartan helmet, which is kind of cool.
Oh yeah.
And that event was awesome, man. That Oil and Gatsby event. That thing's amazing.
That's right. We didn't. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to meet you that night, but you were busy running around with a Spartan helmet and spear. So I was
next year,
next time.
I don't think I'm going to do the fashion show next year. Not because I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved it. I have so much fun doing it, but it takes away from being able to network and meet folks like yourself.
It's such a unique thing, though. I mean, it's one of those things. I told my wife it could be one of those things where if it were done poorly, you'd be like, this is the worst shit I've ever seen in my life. But it's just amazing. It somehow is amazing.
It is, man. It's great. Big shout out to Social Octane, Mark LaRue, Madison, the whole crew over there. They do a jam of job with all that.
It's pretty impressive. But anyhow, as far as the podcast goes, it's the Street Smart podcast. There's a YouTube, you can just search Street Smart podcast. It'll come up. Perfect. And, obviously subscribe, whatever. It'd be fantastic. Help me out. But it's on Spotify, Apple. It's on all the platforms. People are like, man, how'd you get on all those? Like, you literally pay into a host and they do it for you. Like, it's not a big deal. Yeah. But all those places, as far as Instagram goes, my personal one is Street Smart Joe. And then the podcast is Street Smart Pod. But yeah, cool. LinkedIn, you can just look me up, Justin Overstreet. And it's pretty easy to find me. Like I told my wife, I'd probably be one of the easier people to kill. I'm literally doing the same thing every day and I'm all over the place. So it's not too hard, but no, again, I can't tell you, number one, I appreciate you having me on and two, it's been great seeing your success and also, getting to meet your wife and all of that. And you guys live in Katy, right?
That's it, man. We're on the west
So we meet
side.
halfway. We need to meet halfway and have dinner
I
one night. That'd be too
know.
good.
I go all over the place, and I'd love to come up to the north side any day of the week, man. And appreciate, yeah, super kind of you to mention that, and the same thing with the wife. But I'm curious, what is Street Smart Joe? Where does Joe come from?
Justin Overstreet, J.O.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I should have thought of that. Makes sense. I was
Yeah.
like, what Joe? I'm like, what in the world?
It's
It's like
pretty
your middle
clever. I
name.
know. I know.
No, it is. It's great. But
So what's funny
no.
is I used to have Jitsu in my handle, and I was like, God, everybody does Jitsu has that. Is so cheesy. And then
Yeah.
and then the Street Smart, I just figured I'd Street Smart Joe.
I like it, man. Awesome. Well, keep crushing it. Congrats on the success. Again, everything you're doing. For the listeners, subscribe, leave a review, share this with at least one person. Whoever's listening, if you could right now, unless you're driving, of course, hit the share button, share it with one of your buddies, coworkers. And if you could hit me up on LinkedIn, add me. And if there's a cool guest or any topics you'd like me to cover, again, I got a wide ranging network that we can talk about basically anything. So if there's something you're curious on, or a certain company or individual that you'd like to hear more about, let me know. And always remember that everyone deserves access to energy, and we is greater than me. Thanks, everybody.